Giving everyone a moment to join in here, and then we'll begin. Giving everyone a moment to join in, and then we'll begin. Welcome to ARMA International's webinar, Rethinking Document Management. I'm Nick Inglis. I'm the Executive Director of Content and Programming at ARMA International, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Today we're joined by Bob Larrivee, who will be sharing his in-depth knowledge on the modernization of document management, and along with Randy Sanders, who will be drawing from his expertise and is from our sponsor for today's webinar, Access. ARMA is incredibly thankful for the financial support that makes programming like this possible. When choosing business partners and solutions for your document management and information programs, I hope you will give extra consideration to the solution providers who continue to invest in you, solution providers like Access. In today's webinar, Bob Larrivee is going to be sharing the fundamentals of revitalizing document management for the modern organization. For those who have attained your IGP, the Information Governance Professional certification, today's webinar counts towards 1 continuing education credit in the information management category. Slides for today's webinar will be made available after the webinar in your email. If you have a question during the webinar, feel free to ask in the Q&A box. We are unlikely to get to all questions just based on the number of participants today. We will respond to any questions received after the webinar has concluded. I want to call your attention to a poll that we're conducting during today's webinar. Take a minute while you're listening in and answer a couple of quick questions to let us know what progress you've been making in document management. We'll be sharing the results in an infographic after today's webinar. Before we get started now, I want you to consider doing something great for yourself, all while helping support ARMA this year. ARMA Pro members continue to say over and over again that they're wildly satisfied with what they're receiving as professional members. Over 95% of our members say that they would recommend ARMA membership to their colleagues. I don't know of any other association that comes even close on that metric. ARMA is on the rise, and we need you to help us get the message out. The people who are managing information in their organizations, only a small percent are actual ARMA members. That needs to change, and we need your help to get the word out. Remember that feeling that you had when you first discovered ARMA and all the resources that you gained access to? Please share that feeling. Get other people on the path towards success and encourage your organizations to make everyone who is managing information a member of ARMA International. We even offer group discounts. So share that feeling of knowing that you're not alone in this. Share ARMA professional membership. The ARMA Conference 2019 is coming up in October. We're calling it the ARMA InfoCon in recognition of the merger between ARMA and the Information Coalition's Information Governance Conference. This year is going to be incredible, and we've got registration open right now. ARMA's on the rise, and our conference this year is shaping up to be a wealth of learning, networking, and opportunities for workshops on topics that are important to you. Register now at arma.org/infocon. Want to learn more about today's topic? We've got a white paper now available called Revitalizing Document Management, also sponsored by the great folks at Access. To give you more detail on the topic in a downloadable format, we'll include the link to this white paper in our post-webinar email. Before we get started with the presentation, we want to take just a moment to thank Access for sponsoring today's webinar. Programming like this just is not possible without the generous support of our great vendor community, and I'm deeply thankful for the support of access. It is now my distinct honor to introduce Bob Larrivee. Bob Larrivee is one of the most knowledgeable people that I know in this profession, hands down. I had the honor of working with Bob at AIM in a past iteration and count him among my friends and people that I thoroughly respect in this crazy profession. Bob was inducted into the AIM Company of Fellows this year and served at AIM for over a decade, most recently as their Vice President and Chief Analyst of Market Intelligence, leading AIM's research. He draws from that experience and deep understanding of the profession when looking at any topic. He served as an analyst, an advisor to startups in the information space, and a consultant. He now leads Bob Larrivee Consultancy, where he works with organizations and vendors providing insights, analysis, guidance, and education. Bob is someone that I look to for guidance and mentorship, and it is my absolute honor to pass the baton over to Bob Larrivee.
Thank you, Nick. I'm humbled by your kind words. Thank you so much. And thank you to Access, as you mentioned, because without them, we wouldn't all be here. And thanks to everybody that's joining us from around the globe. And so, as Nick mentioned, we're talking about modernization of document management and how things have changed. And one of the things that I see and over and over again is that organizations really can't see the forest through the trees. They can't see their own forest. They're too close to it all. And what I mean by that is a lot of times what will happen is an organization will say, I want to do some automation, or I want to do some document management in this area, or I want to do some capture in this area, whatever the case might be. And they're only looking at a tiny slice, this tiny little slice. And that's going to have an impact. Those of you who know me know that I focus a lot on process. And a lot of document management systems, they will have a direct access or a direct impact on process. So when we talk about capture, things like capture at first touch point, distributed capture, centralized capture, and all that, it's going to have an impact on those business processes. And so organizations, basically what they've got to do, let me see here. For some reason, thank you. Organizations, for some reason, just can't see that whole picture. And really what they need to do is they need to be able to take a step back and look at the whole organization, right? A more holistic view of the organization, a holistic view of operations, a holistic view of their business processes. And when I say that in relation to processes, what we're talking about is end to end. And so from beginning to end, from the time information enters our organization or is created within the organization till the time that we dispose of it. And what this really means is we've got to have a really strong information governance framework in place to be able to handle this and give us the guidance that we need. I guess I'm going to have to do the next thing. Thank you. Okay, for some reason I don't have it here, so we'll just do it that way. So meeting the modern needs of the organization is what we're talking about. Businesses are faced with all kinds of different challenges, compliance and data loss. I mean, just watch the news and you see this one everywhere, right? And data loss isn't just a matter of somebody hacking into a system. Most of the data loss actually comes from within. And people don't necessarily know that they're a leak, for example. I don't like to call people leaks, but that's the crux of it. When we talk about things like operational efficiency, organizations, businesses are trying to become much more efficient and effective at the way that they function, basically focusing on the customer experience. If you've got a bad customer experience, and use this in your own daily life, right? You go someplace, you want service, you want quality service, you don't get it. Are you going to go back? No. If it's someplace that you've been to before and you had a good experience and now all of a sudden you're getting a bad experience, you're going to question whether or not you really want to go back, right? So operational efficiency has that impact, especially on the customer experience. And then, of course, security and access controls. There's this idea of security. We're going to put up this big electrified fence around our information vault. Well, that's great. But again, from inside, access controls. who has access to this information? Should they have access to it? So these are some of the challenges. And then, of course, forming a defensible and compliant information management program, having something in place. And this is, when I use the word defensible, this is one where it's really kind of an interesting conversation. What defines defensible? Well, I've got to be able to, as a lawyer, for example, if we're being brought into audit or litigation, I've got to be able to stand in front of our challengers and prove to them that we're doing all the right things. In fact, I have a couple of friends who are attorneys, and hopefully it'll stay within this little group of ours that are watching today, that I have attorney friends, but no offense to any attorneys. But a lot of times things will happen in the news, and I'll talk with these guys, with these folks, and I'll say, what would you do if you were in this situation? How would you attack that? And then how would you defend against it? Now, in many cases, they talk about not challenging the technology at first. The technology is not necessarily their issue. If it's installed properly, if it's maintained according to vendor specifications, then there's really not a whole lot you can challenge about that. But what they will challenge is the way that you use it. So your processes and your practices around it. And this gets back to the idea of having that governance program, that framework that says, these are the tools we use. This is how we're going to use them. This is who's authorized to do that, and so on. And so that's what they're going to go for first. If the attorney finds an inconsistency in your practices and your procedures, guess what? That opens the door for them. Next slide, please. So when we talk about compliance and data loss, as Nick mentioned, I was formerly the head of research and the chief analyst over at AIM. And we did, my thing was to do research, go out and gather data and then come back and do some analysis on it. And one of the industry watches that I completed over there, we talked about compliance and data loss and what is the focus for business organizations. 61% said compliance, and 51% said that preventing data loss, that's the biggest drivers for them when we talk about things like automation and document management and information management in general. Creating searchable knowledge was highlighted by 48%. Now, searchable, I have this thing about search versus find. It's one thing to be able to search, but it's another thing to actually find what you're looking for. And so the idea that we can make something searchable gives us that higher probability that we'll be able to find what it is we're looking for. And then, of course, reducing storage and doing it in a way that's defensible. So in other words, when we reach the end of the retention periods, barring any litigation holds or legal holds and things along those lines, we get rid of all of this information that we no longer need. Okay. Next, please. So how bad can it really be? That's the question that I get asked all the time. It's like, yeah, you guys are always talking about this stuff, but really, how bad is it? Well, there's another source that I go to on a regular basis. It's called the Identity Theft Resource Center. A very interesting place. In 2017, they reported 1,579 data breaches. There were 179 million records exposed in that particular period. In 2018, as of August 14th, 790 breaches with almost 28 million. So is it big? Yes. Is there a probability that this could happen to you? The probability is there. The possibility exists. The question is not when, but how. Not if, but it will. And so we have to prepare for that, right? So when we look at the breach breakdown, who was reporting these breaches? Who did they reach out to? 361 of them were reported by businesses. So businesses just like you and I have. 213 were in medical and healthcare. Now think about that. Medical and healthcare records. All of a sudden somebody has access to all of the information about you, your medical history, insurance. Oh, wonderful. Credit cards that you've used? Yeah, that's included too, right? 96 was banking, credit, and financial. But the one that really, to me, is kind of interesting is 64 of them were from government and military. Now, this one really kind of scares me because the government and military, you would think that they've got everything under control. You would think that everything is nice and secure, access controls are in place, and guess what? Wrong. They're not. I've actually had the opportunity to work with several different agencies in the federal and some state governments. And really, they're challenged with the same things that we are. The same types of access controls. Who has what? If somebody leaves the department, do we eliminate the access capabilities, or are they still existent? And so these are some of the challenges that they face as well. Next, please. So when we look at things like operational efficiency, 67% of the organization said that they have less than half of their processes automated. And only 3% say they actually reached the 90% level. Now, 90% kind of constitutes 100% in their minds because they've only got a few things here and there that they need to touch on, okay? But if we're talking only 67% say that half, remember that's the two numbers, right? 67%, not even 3/4 of the businesses that were reached out to, only half of their processes have been automated. So what about the other 50%? And what about the half that they've already got done? Have they just done a drop and run, what I call drop and run, which they go in there, they drop in technology, they go, okay, we're done, let's move on to the next project? Or are they looking at it and saying, this is just the beginning, and now we get into continuous improvement mode? Always looking to improve, always looking to enhance what's been done. Next, please. So this gets back to the point of governance, and having a strong governance framework that they can build their information ecosystem under, all of the procedures, the practices, everything that you need to run the business in a very compliant way. When we talk about governance, some of the questions that when I ask about governance, I've actually said, so what rules do you have in place? And unfortunately, I've gotten the answer back, what rules? I don't know that we even have governance in place. And it gets even more interesting when we talk about records. They'll say, well, we have governance over records management, what's declared an official record, but nothing for information, nothing over our document management practices. And so there's this great divide that sits there and says, yeah, records management, those guys got it well under control, but the rest of our world is total chaos, right? And so the research that we did, 22% said, yeah, we've got nothing, or maybe we just have some plans in place, but whether or not those plans will actually be implemented, I don't know. I really don't know. 36% said, yeah, we got some stuff, but it's really immature. And I'll ask a question like, define immature for me. What does that mean? And most of the time I get an answer back saying, well, we've got rules, and they kind of told us what the rules are, but it's not standard or consistent across the enterprise. And it's up to each individual to do what they're supposed to do with nobody monitoring them. Well, okay, you're right. That's very immature. Then some of it is mixed across departments. So some departments are much better, like HR, for example, and finance, because of the regulatory guidelines that they are under. But I'll ask, like, well, what about R&D and manufacturing? How are those guys doing? Well, R&D kind of is a loose cannon. What do you mean? Well, they just put stuff on share drives and they share it with everybody, and there really is no governance around how they manage their information. They all have their own syntax. They all have their own way of organizing information. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, so 1/4 of your organization is kind of in a total state of chaos. 15% of them told us that, yeah, they had enterprise-wide IG policies. Now, here's the caveat to that. If you have a policy in place, do you actually have procedures in place that help people adhere to those policies, number one? And do you have a way to audit the environment to make sure that those policies are being adhered to and the procedures are being followed? Next, please. When it comes to security and access controls, this is again where governance becomes key. You know, having a solid governance framework and saying, these are the way we're going to do things. This is the tools we're going to use. Who's going to be allowed to do these different things. And so the largest organizations are more likely to have enterprise-wide policies. You know, a quarter of them said, yeah, okay, we've got something enterprise-wide. 36% of the smallest ones said they absolutely have nothing. But scarier than that is 10% of the largest organizations are saying they have nothing. And so think about that. You know, I'm not going to name corporations, but large aerospace type of organizations, large tobacco firms, pharmaceutical companies, you know, all of these different things. If there's no governance in place, no security and access controls in place for the information side of the house, you know, let's not talk about the records side for the moment, because chances are they've got something there. But look at the bigger picture again, you know, look at the forest, right? Not just the trees. And this is a scary number. This is a really scary number. And when you've got things like GDPA, now the European regulatory guidelines for personal information and keeping PII, personally identifiable information, protected. When you've got the California CCPA, CCP in place, and now all of the other states are starting to fall in line with that. In fact, even the federal government is starting to talk about a GDPR type of regulatory implementation in relation to personal information. And so these are challenges we've got to take seriously now. We've got to prepare for it now. You know, we did a study not long ago when I was still at AIM that asked, how ready are you for GDPR when it was going to go live in May of 2018? And I think it was about maybe 50% said, yeah, we're almost there. Not there, we're almost there. I mean, it was still a large number. And then the other 50% said, well, I don't know. And so this is one of the things that, that I look at, especially when it comes to document management. You know, when you talk about document management, governance has to cover that as well. Okay. And this is, again, getting back to how we're going to structure the framework, how we're going to structure the information that we capture, where we're going to capture the information. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But the idea of capture at first touch point, when something comes into the organization, putting it in that document management system, getting it to kick off a workflow. Those are some of the things that we have to really keep in mind. How do we expand the governance to include our entire information ecosystem, not just pieces of it, okay? And also the way that we work with this information. So we have to rethink document management as a whole. And one of the questions that I like to present is what constitutes a document these days? A document could be paper-based. It could be digitally created Word documents, Excel spreadsheets. We capture video like crazy these days. I mean, just think about it. Is that a document? Could it be considered a document? We're going to put it in a document management system unless, you know, we start using some other things more enhanced depending on what types of videos we're keeping. Audio files. This file, for example, this is you know, we're going live, we're collaborating on this. And this is one of those things that we look at and say, okay, we've got to take a look at this. And really what it comes down to is they're information assets, right? They're really business objects that we're dealing with. And so we have to be able to manage these in a very compliant and very adherent way. Next, please. So the organizational challenges, you know, in relation to all of the things that I've been talking about and how we manage these business objects, these information assets, whatever you want to call them, if we even have policies in place, how do you enforce that policy? That's one of the biggest issues that folks are talking about. Yeah, we have policies, but guess what? Nobody's monitoring it. Then also getting the right people interested. getting them involved, especially from the senior management level. Okay, so the idea of taking these information assets, these business objects, regardless of what we're talking about, putting it under control, addressing these challenges. And senior management participation is not just lip service. It means they're standing right there, right with you, and saying, these are the governance policies, these are the procedures, these are the tools, these are the business objects that we deal with. Okay? Next slide, please. So what are you going to do? What should you do? Well, one of the things that I'm going to tell you right now is you've already taken a great first step. You've taken a great first step. You've joined us here. What we look at is automating our processes, getting in front of this. When we talk about automating processes, look at not just the slice that you're doing, but look at the end-to-end process. And if I make a change here, what is the impact in front of it and behind it? Okay. Am I talking about bringing information in? Am I talking about reviewing information? What's the workflow associated with this business object? Who are the players that are going to touch it? Do they need to touch it? So think about those things. Take that step back, look at your business as a whole, and think about these business objects, this information that you're dealing with, this data that we've got. Okay, next slide, please. There's this push that we keep hearing. And one of the things that we hear a lot is about automation. One of the studies that I did said, 33% of the people who responded said they feel automation is more consistent than humans. 20% said it's more accurate. Well, I got to ask you the question, how does it learn? It may be that it's more consistent, but we have to teach these things too. And so 48% said they actually prefer a machine prompt with human review. So we train these environments. You hear about machine learning and artificial intelligence and so on. We still have to train these things. I look at it as people and machines, humans and robots, working side by side, right? We teach them, help them refine. They get better and stronger as they go forward. But there's always this human that's there to validate. Okay? Don't be afraid of it. This is one of those things where, when you talk about automation, my attorney friends will tell you that if you've got something set up in an automated environment and it's consistent and accurate across the board, accuracy being the key, then that's a really good position to be in. That's a good defensible position. Next slide. When we talk about strengthening security and access controls, and these are some of the things that we're going to hear from our friends at Access, strengthening and getting our access controls in place. This is where we've got to lock down. And when I say lockdown, I don't mean completely. We've got to give the right access to the right people. Okay, so next slide, please. So we leverage security and access controls within your DMS system, right? To manage these business objects, whatever that may be, right? To manage your information assets. What we need to do is we have to look at the initial access to the document management system, to your system as a whole, to your solution, all right? That means everybody can get in or not. But this is when you first join an organization, they give you an ID and a password to get into their information systems, right? So I have a general access level. Then we can start looking at breaking it down. If we've got the system created with different files or different areas holding or storage facilities, then we lock those down. We can even lock down the actual objects, right? And in some cases, lock down information within the objects. One of the biggest things that we're hearing today in the news is all about the redaction. You know, everything's redacted. Well, we can actually do that in some cases within some of these technologies that have that capability to automatically redact based on your authorization and your credentials. Okay. And then we can limit share, print, and email capabilities. Remember we were talking about leaking information? Oh, well, you know, Nick needed something, and so I emailed it to him. And then, well, Randy asked Nick if he had any information, and so Nick just kind of passed it on and forwarded that email on to Randy. And now Randy has it, but I didn't know that Nick did that. This is a challenge. Randy, have you ever seen that?
We see that all the time. And it happens in the worst cases, particularly in HR, because, you know, Nick is the auditor, you know, in this case, and he's asked for a piece of information, and you've shared it, thinking you're doing the right thing, and ultimately it's you, Bob, you've lost control over that piece of information, right? And
absolutely.
And as you alluded to earlier, you know, the employee inadvertently leaked some information, and God forbid there was some, you know, PII information on there or something like that, and it spells a lot of trouble. So, you know, I'm just over here nodding my head because we see it all day long.
Yep, it's a huge challenge, and a lot of times people don't know that they've actually just leaked something. They don't realize it. And this gets back into the whole idea of, you know, training. We have to train the individuals that work for us on this. But the other thing too is when we talk about all of these things that we're discussing in this session today, it's also adding value, increasing the value. Information is the currency of today and the future when you really think about it. The person who holds the key to all the information is the person who, you know, really kind of commands things. And so that's part of what we're dealing with here, but we've got to get better control over it. Next, Nick. So creating that defensible or compliant IAM program becomes essential. And when we talk about the program, a well-defined one comes up with consistent processes. This is the thing that is, you know, again, if I'm challenged, I want to make sure that there is consistency across everything that I do. I don't want to be non-compliant in one area and compliant in another. So we've got to look at it from an enterprise-wide, but also a global perspective. Authorized tool sets. This is one that really is a huge challenge today. I mean, I may sit here and say, Access is our choice, right? As a company, we choose to use Access. The employees need to know this. The employees also have to make sure that if they need something beyond what I'm providing them, they come back and they ask us for it. A lot of organizations, there are personal tools. I'm not going to name any of them here, but a lot of them you probably would recognize if I did, that are being used by employees in different companies. And what's happening is they'll use one of these things in the cloud because the cloud is there. But it stays there, puts us at risk. Puts us at risk. So they need to share something. They're not going to email it because we told them don't do that. But we didn't tell them they couldn't do something else. Or they just sidestep it, right? We have to have document level audit capabilities. This gets back to the defensibility. Who touched it? When did they touch it? And this applies to every business object and information asset that we have. Who touched it? When did they touch it? What did they do with it? We've got to be able to track this, because what we don't want to have happen is somebody to come in and challenge our information management practices as a whole. Gets back to employee and partner training. If we're going to extend our information ecosystem to include partners, then the partners have to play by our rules, okay? And when we do audit, and we should audit, there should be corrective actions. that are taking place. So either retraining, or in some cases, you know, when you sign that employee handbook, it says termination for not following the rules. Sometimes that might have to happen, okay? So we also have to think about things like collaboration. How do you collaborate with these guidelines? How do we share information in a compliant way, in a way that we can still keep control, exchange knowledge across not just the departments, but across organizations? I mean, when you think about, especially with external partners, companies like, you know, in the aerospace industry, there's all kinds of subcontractors there. And so we've got to have that capability that the information ecosystem supports that, okay? It gets engagement, creates an environment of engagement and information sharing, okay? And the other thing is reuse. If I have something that I've created, I'll use this. If I have something that I've created and it may have some value to somebody else, we have to make sure that that person can find this so that they can leverage what I've done or pieces of what I've done in relation to this. And yes, that is really a watch. But they'd be able to take what I've already created here and not have to go recreate the wheel. That's part of the knowledge sharing idea, the idea that we're taking and we're making a much healthier information ecosystem. We're extending the value of all of this business, these business objects, this information that we're creating and we're managing, so that it can be used and reused as opposed to recreation. Make sense? So next slide, please. Okay. So one of the things that comes up in relation to benefits, and this is one of the things that I hear all the time too. I'm not looking just for structure and, you know, there's got to be something in it for us as an organization, something in it for me as an employee. And so the effective benefits, of course, we talk improved operational efficiency and effectiveness, things like cost savings. I hear a lot of this. Right? That we want to be able to cut our costs because we want to increase our operating, our capital. We want to increase profitability. I want business resilience. Now, I live in Florida, and we're right now starting to prepare for hurricane season. This is one of the things that I look at and say, okay, business resilience. All of a sudden, Hurricane Howard comes through. I don't know if that's on the list this year or not, but I'll use Howard. It popped in my head. Hurricane Howard blows through here, and now we've got a state of chaos. From a business resilience standpoint, I want to be able to get back up and running. I have to get back up and running right now. I can't wait for 3 months. I've got to figure out a way to do this, okay? I've also got to figure out a way to make sure that I'm still in compliance as my business moves forward through this reset or recovery, whatever you want to call it. And so one of the things that we can do is we can look at things like automating compliance. The minute we capture something, ingest it into our environment, we apply all of the rules and regulations to it. We don't have to depend on the human to do this, right? I look at things like cross-enterprise access and adoption as a benefit. Anywhere, anytime. Here's something I'd like you to think about, and this is really going out there, all the way to Mars. NASA, as most people know, is looking at starting a colony on the moon, on Mars. And there's all these business objects, data objects, that we're gathering constantly. And it will get even more so, right? Yeah, we've got military. The military, they're starting to look at the Space Force. So you're going to have all this information, all these business assets that are coming at us that we have to get control of from the universe, from around the universe. I wish Carl Sagan was still alive to hear this and to see this and be part of it. We have to minimize risk and non-compliance, right? So capture from first touch point, which means the minute somebody does something on Mars, we've got to get it in there at lightning speed and take control of it and protect it, okay? When it comes to things like e-discovery, if we manage our information right, if we manage these business objects correctly, there's going to be actually less volume to go through because we're going to eliminate rot. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's redundant, outdated, or trivial information, business objects that we are maintaining for no reason. Okay. And then, of course, the consistency and the adherence to our business rules and to the regulatory rules that we have to follow. Next, please. So again, you've taken the first step. You're here. You've heard some of my perspectives, and this comes from a long, long career. But still, some of the problems are the same today as we've been dealing with for many years in business. Now, what I'm going to do is turn it back over to Nick, and we're going to see how Access truly deals with this in a very, very interesting way. Nick?
Oh, thank you, Bob. I'm going to be digesting all of that for quite some time. There's so much information and statistics and knowledge packed into that presentation, Bob. Thank you. We often think about document management in terms of the way it used to be. I'm glad we had the chance to hear from you on the modern approaches on documents and business objects. We're also going to hear today from Randy Sanders. We've heard from you a little already. Here's, I have to say, I've been, as an aside, I've been deeply impressed by Access's commitment to providing education and knowledge freely to the community. Not every vendor has such a strong commitment to the ongoing development of the profession. And that means a lot. And that's why I'm glad to have Randy with us here today. Randy's the senior product manager at Access, where he served for the past several years. You've been with Access and its predecessors for quite some time. He's a subject matter expert and shares his knowledge across Access products and services with clients. Randy's a straight shooter who really tells it like it is. And Access's clients really greatly benefit from his expertise. Randy's passion in solving organizational challenges really shines through in all of his interactions. I'm very glad to pass the baton over to Randy Sanders.
Thanks, Nick. Bob, awesome job. Fantastic. And I'm humbled to share this time with you. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to echo a lot of your comments because they're super important, right? And so as you go through and assess the situation that you're in, you don't want to focus on the symptoms, right? You don't want to focus on the trees, so to speak. You want to focus on the forest. And ultimately figure out what the root causes are in the situation, how to think about it holistically. And it is an end-to-end process that you need to make sure that you're dovetailing into the day-to-day operations within your business, right? So if you're doing something, that is outside of somebody's normal course of business, it's going to fall by the wayside. So you got to be integrated into the process. And you do that through foundational items. And, these are things we've been talking about. And as you make decisions for solutions, services, or products, and you want to make sure that you're doing that through the lens or the filters of automation, defensible policy and compliance, built-in security for sure, right? And accessibility. then you have that framework for that foundation, right? So it's not just the concrete that's there, but it represents that core strength, that rebar. That's why that picture's there. Because without it, that foundation will ultimately crumble. Maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, right? Now, the best part is, as you have a solution that it has that foundation, that fundamental core items, you should only have to review it on an annual basis and make those continuous improvements, right? As Bob mentioned. It's why automating the compliance and classification and doing those things as part of and let's not call it document management, let's call it, business object management, is essential to being successful. It helps to reduce the change in the organization, but keeps your users compliant. And it's without them thinking about it, right? It becomes part of their daily flow. Now, in order to do that, right, unless you're going out and building it, which, let's face it, you're probably not, you need to work with a true trusted partner to guide you through that process. And it's not just, I'm going to buy something off the shelf. It's working with somebody who's going to provide you, a sounding board for guidance, support, best practices, providing information like we're doing here today, throughout your relationship with that vendor, right? Let me see if I have control here, Nick. Okay. And as we said, the foundation is really just the first part. You want to build a blueprint that can be used throughout your organization by, finding common elements that each one of those business units or collections of information have. For instance, what is the collection of information? Is it HR? Is it AP? Is it contracts? Whatever. Find some unique piece of information. What are those classifications? Contract number, employee ID, something like that. These are fundamental things that happen within each one of the pieces of information or business objects. The solutions that you ultimately have should adapt to the collections of information, right? Not everything is just a storage and retrieval kind of situation. There's different levels of security with HR documents. Not only do we want to make them secure, but we want to make them accessible. They may or may not go through a workflow, whereas finance documents or invoices need to go through a specific workflow for approvals, those types of things. Ultimately, compliance, right? Whether that's federal, corporate, governmental, country compliance, whatever it is, right? And so there's a life cycle to this, right? And each one of these represents a product, a service, some sort of action that's taking place on this information. And it needs to be reviewed and adjusted as your business matures. And obviously what you want to do is you want to make sure that your partner that you're dealing with grows and adapts with you over time. So you may use, part of the services or solutions within this wheel that we're looking at, but ultimately, if you need to outsource, so to speak, some of it or all of it, let's, make sure that your vendors can do that. Go to the next slide there, Nick. Now, what we're talking about here, obviously, is more than just what tool, right, to solve your problems and make you compliant. But the modern tool set is a combination of software. It's a combination of services that help tailor your solution towards your business, right, and the individual, elements within there. So from Access, we have a solution called the Carta Document Cloud, which couples software and services to help organizations navigate the digital environment, the business object environment, to remain compliant. Within the Carta Document Cloud or Carta DC are elements that support specific business units like Carta HR and Carta AP that are specifically designed to support those unique document classifications, approvals, security needs within those different environments. Now, embedded within this platform, and as people work, are the tools for compliance, efficiency, and document security and of course, proper information management and governance. And Carta DC is supported by the full range of services that Access provides: storage, imaging, conversion, shredding, and even consulting services. And by having these service-enabled software, organizations, our customers, adapt really quickly to best practices, policies, and ultimately stay compliant. And so, you know, it's a perfect bridge from, you know, this physical world that we've been, you know, really got a good handle on, to sort of this digital object universe that we're going to. So, you know, love for you to check us out. Thanks, Nick. Back to you for some questions I think we have.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. That's awesome. It's great to keep up to date with the Access team, how you guys continue to provide excellence to your clients at Access. I would like to move us into the Q&A portion of our program. So if you haven't had a chance to ask your question in the Q&A box of the webinar, go ahead and do so now. We already have a few questions that have come in. The first here is for Bob. Bob, this person says that they have small scanners spread out on desks all around their company, and mail gets delivered to the various offices within the organization. They're considering centralizing their mailroom operations to a single point with scanning and digital delivery of documents, leveraging a document management system. Is this the best way to set things up, and do you have any advice as they're going to be starting their project in the fall?
It's a really interesting question, because at one point, distributed scan or distributed capture was the mantra. A scanner on every desk, if you will. And the idea was that individuals would take that information, they would bring it into the system, and then do whatever it is that they need to do with it.
I have a feeling the scanner companies had something to do with that mantra.
It could be. It could be. Getting back to what I've always said is capturing information and bringing it into the ecosystem at first touch point. That's my preferred. And so the idea of a mailroom, a centralized mailroom, to be able to do that, I'm in favor of it. It doesn't mean that people shouldn't have scanners on their desks, but think about this. When you look at the lack of governance in most organizations, if you don't teach the individuals and don't audit to make sure they're doing it, how do you know that they're going to put this information into your ecosystem consistently? You don't. How do you know it's going to have the right access and security controls? You don't. Where we can automate a lot of that governance, the process, by centralizing capture. And just like I said, the minute it enters the building, boom, we digitize it if it's in paper form. If we're doing digitally born information, for example, then there should be a way that we can automate that part of it as well, to capture that information, bring it into the system, and get it under control. So, really, I think what it comes down to is understanding what the business scenario is and the business need. And then what you do is you create that environment that best suits the need.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bob. And Randy, the next question here is for you. This person's wondering how the Carta HR indexing engine protects personally identifiable information. They're concerned because they're on the HR side.
Yeah, so that's a really pointed question. So as index information comes into the system, it goes through a series of layers that uses both automation and AI, as well as human intervention, right? And understanding the structure of the document, and we're even evolving to the point of being able to identify within a particular document, hey, this is where a social security number should be, or this is what it is because it's a handwritten thing and they're trying to recognize what that is. Or, hey, this is an I-9, it should have a social security number on it. Let me, in this quadrant of stuff. So that's all sort of advanced stuff, right? And so today it's how do we understand what, this thing is when we get it into the computer? And it's really easy for us to look at a piece of paper and say, oh, I know what that is. That's a resume. Go train a computer to do that. Particularly a resume, it's really, really difficult. The structure is different, the content's different, the words are different. It's all different, but at a glance what it is. So it takes a multitude of steps to do that. So long-winded answer, though, is not only are we classifying the document itself within the application, within Carta HR, there's security controls to make sure that you're not seeing the information that you shouldn't be seeing, right? Down to an individual document level, as well as, I'm responsible for these handful of employees or this swath of employees. And then within there is redaction capability. So if you did need to share it out, you could do that in a way that's secure. So it takes a multitude of layers, but the future is advancing really fast. And obviously the more we can get into that first touch, right? And more to understand from not even having a piece of paper, it makes it a lot easier, right? And we'll all get there. It's just, we're bridging this hybrid gap right now. So good question on Nick.
And we have time for one more question here. If you had asked a question and we didn't get to it today, I'll be sure that we pass along the questions that you had to the speakers to whom you've addressed the question so that they have a chance to respond to you directly. This next question isn't for either of you. It's for, I'll have you both chime in on it. This person has been struggling with a document management system from a vendor that has been acquired twice and little updates have happened in the past several years. Any quick advice that you'd offer to them as they begin to evaluate systems to migrate their 20 years of mission critical documents? Quick advice, yeah.
Quick advice, run. No, I would say, first of all, the whole acquisition thing, it's ongoing. And it's something that's happening. It will happen. It will continue to happen. There's no way to really predict who's going to buy who and what they're going to be like in the future. And that's, evident just looking over the last 5 years even. What I would suggest is, first of all, revisit your actual business requirements. Because what you've had for the last 20 years was based on 20-year ago requirements probably, and I'm guessing they probably haven't been refreshed. So I would say, really look at the business requirements very tightly. Make sure that you understand exactly what you need and why you need it, because you don't want to buy things you don't need, but you don't want to also lose things that you currently have, okay? From a migration standpoint, one of the things that I will caution on, and I've seen this happen a lot, is when you actually start doing migration, when you ingest into the new system, unfortunately, most of them say this is the creation date, and it really isn't. It was the migration date. And that's going to be something that you would have to wrestle with seriously from a risk management standpoint, is if you're ever questioned, when was this created? How long do we keep it? And the creation date shows up today for 1 million documents. And guess what? Yeah.
That's a great point, Bob.
That's the quickest I can answer that one.
Yeah.
The big ones to unpack. Randy, any quick advice on that one?
Yeah, so the quick advice that I would share, and one of the things to make sure about, is making sure that wherever you're going is not proprietary in terms of formatting of documents, right? That's number one. Number two, making sure that you can make sure that you get your documents out without a lot of hoops and without a lot of going through a lot of processes, and it can be a complete nightmare. And I would also echo Bob's comments here of, revisit that 20 years. They may be mission critical documents, absolutely, but to make sure that that's the case. And that new system should have the ability to add a date field for the creation date, right? It should, obviously, If it doesn't, then that's an issue, but make sure that you document it is to make sure that it is a part of that defensibleness that we've been talking about the whole time. I don't even know if that's a word, but so that's how I would, at least caution within the first 3 seconds here of that.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I want to thank both of you, Bob, Randy, for today's webinar, and thank you for both of you, for continuing to serve the community by sharing your knowledge. It's very appreciated. Our next webinar is going to be announced soon, so keep an eye on your email inbox. Before we close, there's the Q&A slide. Before we close, I'd like to remind you to become a professional member of ARMA International. Take the time to invest in yourself. And while you're at it, take the time to register for the ARMA conference in Nashville this October. ARMA has an array of resources available for you from our white papers, training, and magazine. In our magazine right now, you can read an excerpt of that document management white paper at magazine.arma.org. along with an array of other articles and resources now neatly organized by topic in our new digital format. On behalf of our speakers, on behalf of the wonderful folks at ARMA who give it their time and money to sponsor programming like this webinar today, and from all of us here at ARMA International, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar and wish you all the best in all of your information endeavors. Have a great day.